Hello guys, so today we're going to be taking a look at my newest watercolor illustration. It was inspired by my trip to the Redwoods, and you'll see in a couple of shots I do have a thumbnail from my bullet journal travel sketchbook of that while I was traveling. So at first I tape off with just regular blue painter's tape. Sometimes I use masking tape, but I find the blue tape works better. I really like it. And I'm also just mapping out what I want my composition to look like and looking at references of what the different types of trees look like in the redwood forest. My first step, and I don't do this very often, but for this particular illustration, I do want there to be pure bits of white. I'm adding masking fluid. Masking fluid is an excellent tool to use. It helps mask off an area that you want to stay completely white. It's also great for adding washes of color, and then you can remove it and add another layer of watercolor on top of it. So it's a very helpful tool to make watercolors a little bit more easier. And first I'm going to be adding a wash for the sky. The sky is going to be one of the main focal points in this piece, so I really want it to stand out. And I'm using the salt technique here, so I added a wash, and I'm going to do the same on the bottom, and then add in some regular table salt. Now I'm blocking in basic color for the entire painting, where I want things to be, and I'm kind of working on my color palette as I go. Sometimes I do color planning ahead of time, but most of the time I have an idea in my head of the colors I want to use and the particular palette that I want to stick to. I chose to do the details of this tree and spend a lot of time on it because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as far as the rest of the trees go. And I was pretty happy with the result, so I got kind of a little too focused on this one spot too early, and that is not necessarily a good thing to do in painting. You should try to build the painting up as a whole, but my favorite part is the little details, so I didn't do that. I'm also waiting for the washes to dry, which you just saw me checking the salt, see if it was dry. You have to be very patient with watercolors because even though they are quick to dry, if you're adding different layers, you really have to wait for the next layer to completely dry underneath it. Otherwise, you can get warping of the paper or muddying of the colors. So now I'm trying to map out which kind of trees I want where. So I'm using just Google image references. Blocking out the colors is actually one of my least favorite parts. Not my absolute least favorite, that's coming up next, but it's not fun for me. But it is important that you map out your entire composition before you really start getting into the details, because if you mess up on the composition, you're going to have to start all over. You really don't want to waste time on details before you get that started. And you'll see here I'm adding another layer of the wash. I just thought it was too light. I really wanted the front area to be darker, so I added in another wash and did another salt treatment. And again, I wiped out all those details that I just spent all that time on because I realized it was too light in the front. Now I'm going in and getting the tree line right for this piece. And we're about to get into the stage that I hate the most. And that is what I call the ugly phase. A lot of artists will describe the different phases that they go through when they're working on a painting. For me, the ugly phase is when I'm getting really frustrated. It doesn't look like it does in my head. And typically, I really want to quit working on the painting at that point, but you just have to keep pushing through it. And for me, I just push myself through it and keep working. Very rarely will I quit a painting, but it's at this phase. If I'm gonna quit, if it looks like crap and I need to start over, this is gonna be the part where I do that. But for this painting, I really wasn't liking it, but I kept pushing, I kept working on different aspects of it and building up the layers. And watching Netflix as I'm doing this, so that's why I had the Xbox controller. So I was getting really frustrated with building up the layers on the top, so I decided to switch to doing details on the bottom because it would make me happy again. I'm pretty happy with the way the trees have turned out, and at this point I'm just having fun with the different patterns. If you've seen some of my other work, you'll know that I am a fan of Zentangle art, and I try to incorporate a lot of patterns and line work into my paintings. Now, painting is always a learning process, and also sometimes you're not really sure where a painting's going to go or what you're going to do, and you're going to come across problems. And for this particular painting, I wasn't sure what I was going to do at the bottom of the trees, whether I was just going to blend it in or make the lines slowly disappear or turn into shapes. And I kind of decided to do a couple different root systems, which I think turned out okay. It wasn't originally what I thought it would look like, but I'm happy with the results. And you're gonna see I'm gonna start building up layers around the trees and in the background. When you're working, especially with watercolor, but in paintings in general, you know, the more detail, the closer it's gonna look, whereas if it's further away, it should be more washed out. So that's what I'm trying to create depth by using lines and detail. And you'll see I am jumping around a lot. I do that a lot. If I get frustrated or bored with an area, rather than overworking it, I would rather just jump around to something else until I'm willing to come back to the other part. So I'm adding a couple details on the bottom just to kind of get an idea of what I think I want it to look like all down there. And I am really happy with the decision to add the dots and the lines to the bottom, which you'll see up close in just a few minutes. I'm slowly building up the layers of color. I'm typically very hesitant to add black, but in this painting I did use a lot of black. I mostly used the dark brown, but for some of the areas that I really needed to be a lot darker, I did use black watercolor, and I don't do that very often. It can very easily ruin the colors and make it look really muddy and nasty very quickly, so you have to be very careful using the black watercolor. I'm adding in another layer of wash color on the top because it was too light. And at that point I realized the sky just wasn't as vibrant as I really wanted it to be, so this is something I should have really done sooner, but I didn't really notice it until I started adding in the details and the color into the trees, that I really wanted the sky to pop a lot more than it was. So I'm jumping around. I'm avoiding the inevitable of having to add an extra wash into the sky. Also, you'll see I did flip the painting upside down, and that is because sometimes it's just easier to work upside down because you're not focused on necessarily what you're painting, like the object you're painting. If I'm painting shapes or if I'm filling in a wash, it's actually easier to turn it upside down than it is to do it right side up. It's just partly how I work. So I'm adding in the details. And this takes a very long time to add on all these details, but it is my favorite part and I obsess over it a little bit, and I just love it, so it really time flies when I'm working on that portion of the painting. I think adding in all the little lines and dots and fun things really adds to a piece and adds the finishing touches, and I become much more happier with the piece once it has all the details in place. It's always interesting to see how a piece turns out. It usually almost never turns out exactly like I thought it would in my head, but sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Right now I'm removing the masking fluid. And the salt. And then I'm adding in little bits of color, very faint color, to the stars. And lastly, I'm putting on final touches with a white gel pen, adding in a couple more white spots. Very tiny. And a couple of finished details. And I'm done. So now I'm just removing the tape. And adding a little signature on the bottom. And the piece is done. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. I will answer them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye! I wanted to keep the dailies a little bit smaller. I was making them really big in March, and for those of you that didn't see my March video,